Woohoo!
We're live.
Woohoo! We are live. You have no idea about the amount of technical challenges we've had to get here at 5 o'clock on time, but we did, and delighted that you are with us. It's Mark Littlewood from Business Software, and I'm joined today by Paul Kenny, who is West Yorkshire, one of West Yorkshire's leading sales trainers, amongst other things. He's also a long-distance cyclist and lots of other things. He's probably spoken at more business software conferences than anyone. And as you know how much we care about who we have speaking and how much time we put into choosing our speakers, that shows actually what a measure of the esteem in which we hold him. So do you want to say hi, Paul?
Hello, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. And I can't tell you how happy I am to do a second one of these, is it? We had an AMA with Jeff a year or so ago now, so I'm delighted to be back.
Excellent. Well, welcome, and what a week it's been. I know you spent some time cycling across Italy recently, didn't you? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Right. Yeah, it's been a heck of a week.
Yeah, so you were off cycling across Italy, and during that time you have single-handedly caused a Brexit, and it remains to be seen what happens there. And then you were also doing some training for the England football team, I hear.
I am entirely responsible for both ignominious exits. Yeah, I apologise to everyone in advance.
I think all we can say is we're really sorry. We're part of the UK, and we're English, and we have no idea what's going on. And the only thing we were left with doing yesterday as we watched the football was thinking, what an amazing team Iceland are.
Yeah, they were, and we better move on because I don't want to be too depressed during this AMA, Mark.
Okay, so you spoke of business software last year about difficult conversations. Just give us a little bit of a rundown on what that was about.
Okay, well, I mean, that was a funny one because most of the conversations I've done or the presentations I've done have been about sales. And I've always been very happy to come and talk about sales. And we've talked about every different part of the sale and approaches and training your salespeople and motivating your salespeople. But weirdly, the questions I get asked about most in the coffee hall and over dinner are all about relationships within the startup, and it is another side of my business that I spend a lot of time with founders. It's a huge issue, and that's why I wanted to talk about it at
Now, I'm not sure if you're still talking, unfortunately, because you've clicked out, but...
Did I? I'm sorry. Okay.
I'm sure it was entirely your fault. Thank you for having that great cushion in the background, by the way. Sorry, can you just finish what you were saying there, because I think we lost you for a second. Hello? His internet.
Testing.
Yeah, there we are. We're back.
We're back. I don't know what's happening there, I'm afraid. So where were we?
You were normally talking about sales, but we're talking then about conflict, and it wasn't something you normally spoke about. Let's see how we go with this, because it is jumping in and out. If it's not going to work, we'll call it off and think again. But,
okay. So conflict, negotiations between partners, the breakdown of relationships in a business, all of these things happen. They're part of setting up a business. And I think if founders have some structure for having difficult conversations, and I think more importantly than that, that they have some I guess, warning lights that suggest they really must have the conversation, then that's a really important thing. And I think that some of the examples we may go through today, I will have to talk about anonymously because I work one-to-one with these people and I don't want to name names, but it's a very common thing that people set up a business. Often their first employees are their friends or become good friends because they're working out of a basement somewhere. And then as the businesses grow, expectations change on all fronts. Add in a venture capitalist or a whole bunch of new staff, and you end up with a potent political brew. And one of the things a leader has to do is to make sure that everybody is on the same page, and to make sure that that performance issues are dealt with. And a lot of founders find that very, very difficult, because one of the reasons they were inspired to set up their own company was to get away from all that bullshit anyway.
Very true. So you currently run a business that has how many employees and partners?
I have 15 associates. Well, I say I have one employee, 15 associates, and it's a kind of deliberate ploy to because I spend most of my time with my clients to actually reduce those staff. Honest. So yeah, it's a strange setup, but we, even in that sense, the associates that we use are all very bright, very smart, very motivated, and have strong opinions. And you end up still having to have those difficult conversations from time to time because things go wrong with clients. People challenge the strategy on a job, etc. So, you know, whichever way you I structured my company this way for ease, but whichever way you structure it, you know, these conversations will happen.
I guess what I was almost getting at there is that you haven't always been a single partner in a firm.
Oh no, the business.
You've had some quite interesting experiences of your own with founders.
Yeah. I mean, we set up my previous company, Apex Training, 2 founders, both very, very strong-minded people. When I exited the business after we sold it, we had full-time staff approaching 20, 25, and we had spread over 3 offices. We were on the verge of opening a Dubai office, and we had an associate team of 40 plus, or something like that. And so my life became a series of difficult conversations.
And you just didn't want to have them anymore.
No, well, it's not that I didn't want to have them. It's just that the one thing that my exit allowed me to do was to choose my customers carefully, and to do the thing I love, which is being at the sharp end of a business with the founders or with the directors of the business, helping to shape the strategy, helping to shape the sales approach, and helping to manage the growth of the team. And I'd rather be doing that than managing my own team right now. So that's where we are, and it's great.
Yeah.
I see it as a form of retirement, funnily enough, because it's you get to do all the fun bits of the
Excellent. So let's think about a few scenarios where there might be some difficult conversations. And if you have any questions, by the way, there is a Q&A button that you can press. You can pose your questions, and we will pick them if they're good enough. I'm sure they will be. Let's talk about founder conflict. The most common scenario for a tech business or an early stage startup that grows is 2, 3, 4 people get together and they start a business, as you said, and then one person loses interest. And I know thinking back to BoS 2012, there was a really interesting case study that was given around Zipcar, where there were two founders and they had pretty much 50-50 split on the equity. One of them didn't do anything, wasn't expecting the business to really take off, and when it did, the other founder had a really difficult situation to deal with, and actually it really hampered the business. What would your advice be to people when they're setting out to try and minimize some of the challenges that come with that sort of scenario?
Yeah, I only know the Zipcar story as was told by Noam Wesserman in his book, and it's a brilliant book and everybody should read it. But
Richard King.
Yeah, and I think that there's a few things that the advice I always end up giving first is to deal with things quickly when they're this big, because they never get better over time. The problem just gets later and bigger. And I don't know what happened with Zipcar, but I would suggest that in most cases like that, having that conversation of, look, I feel a bit let down by, the work you've done so far, or I feel that, you're not hitting the markers that we agreed, or we're not making the progress that we agreed. And are you really committed to this business? Having that conversation while you're still in the tiny stage allows you to explore all sorts of options that keep everybody happy. And it might be that somebody goes, do you know what, I'm not really interested, but hey, I'd love to keep the money in the business and, and act as a silent investor. And you can have that conversation. I've seen that work. I've even seen it work where a huge argument has ensued and that startup has stopped at that point. And then 2 years later, one of the founders has said, thank God it stopped because it allowed me to do the business properly a second time round. So even out of cataclysmic changes, you can often end up in a better situation. So putting it off almost never, ever makes things better. And as with all rules of thumb, there will be an exception or two that people can throw at me. But generally speaking, that's the first bit of advice that I give. And it's actually the hardest bit to take, especially because those people you founded a business with, as I say, often they're your friends, or you have been through fire with them to get to that, to get from the early startup to a functioning business. And therefore to turn around to somebody who was, 6 months ago was up at 3 o'clock in the morning with you coding or putting together a pitch presentation, and then to turn around to them and say, you're not cutting it on your performance, is a really tough thing to do.
You're making an assumption there that the two founders, or however many founders there are putting money into it. I mean, the most, or more typically, people will be putting sweat equity in.
Yeah, and that's what makes it hard. In some ways, if someone's just put some money in, if I put $500,000 into somebody's business, I'm well within my put £500,000 in, I expect you to put the work in. But where it's sweat equity on all sides, and very often it's sweat equity and a little bit of money, which funnily enough complicates things. And it's that little bit of money for the down payment on the rent, or the to buy 3 Macs for the team or whatever. But when it's sweat equity, that's what makes the conversation hard, because somebody might be actually sweating, but they're not performing, or they might be brilliant, but they're not putting the sweat in. Or we might just have slightly different views about the direction that the business should go in. And this is often amplified by when founders come together who've got different skill sets. So we often don't see, it's hard to appreciate the work that goes in, and it can look like somebody's not trying very, very hard. The arguments I've seen where someone says, well, the sales guys spend all the time on the road and I have no idea what they're doing and whether they care. And the sales guys are going, well, these product guys just sit and drink coffee all day, and the product, they never build anything I ask them to build, and I give them client feedback, and you get into all of this sort of stuff. And it's natural and it's a part of growing. And you know, everybody knows about forming, storming, and you know, norming, performing, and all of that sort of stuff. It's part of growing. So it's not a question of whether you're going to have these discussions. You probably are. It's a question of how well and how elegantly people can raise topics of concern, and how well they can and how brave they can be at addressing them, and also whether they're prepared to put up with the kind of uncomfortableness that can happen once that conversation has happened. It might be transient. They might just not talk to each other for a day and then be fine, or it might be, you know, an extended period of everybody feeling somewhat bruised by it. But my advice has always been the same on this. Expect it to happen at some stage, because if it doesn't happen, then somebody doesn't care enough about the business, or isn't thinking enough about the business. And again, there's another rule of thumb for which there will be an exception. But
sure. I'm going to pick a question here from Fiona McPhee, and I think this is quite interesting for a couple of reasons. Hey Paul, how inevitable do these conversations have to be? In your experience of growing companies, is someone always going to lose out? And I guess there's those difficult conversations when you actually want to get someone out and then restructure the business are very different to those difficult conversations when you want to give someone a kick up the backside because they're not pulling their weight or they're doing the wrong thing. You don't want to lose them.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I think that when you get to the stage where you want somebody out of the business, it's often been a failure on the part of all the founders or all the management team to have those conversations early enough, you know, because things have built over time. So to try and answer Fiona's question, I think are inevitable, and they're inevitable because entrepreneurs are by nature fairly opinionated, slightly paranoid. They care a lot about the business, the product, etc. And there are no rules, so someone's got to work out. There's not a blueprint for any business, you know, worth talking about. And so that you've essentially got 3 or 4 people, maybe each trying to track a different way through the jungle. And you'll have opinions as to whether we go through the river, over the mountains, through the bush, you know, whatever. So that first part is, yes, they're inevitable, and that's why sometimes it's a good thing to just accept that they are and have a plan for how you'll deal with those. We can talk more about that later if you want. The second part is someone always going to lose out? Well, it depends what you mean by losing out. Is someone always going to have to concede? Often, yes, because you can't always have a meeting in the middle, you know, because we end up with design by committee and those things where, in order to avoid upsetting everybody, we'll always take the least contentious path, and it's very easy to lose your way as a business like that. I think so. People might feel like they've lost out, they've lost a bit of power, a bit of influence, etc. And I think that you have to be cognizant of that and to have a plan for bringing the person who's bruised back into the fold. Longer term, sometimes people do lose out. They lose interest, they lose positions, etc. I mean, an example, you know, something I lost out. I had a business partner, and when we sold our business, we were tied in. We were golden. I would like to say golden handcuffed, but you know, to the business. Handcuffed, yeah, to the business. And because we sold to a big blue chip corporate, shall I just keep to you're back. So they didn't like the idea of a partnership running one of their business. They wanted a managing director and another director, and I lost out. And I lost out for all the right reasons. In that Justin, my partner, was a very strong commercial guy, and he drove the sales. I was the content guy, if you like, and I didn't like it. And I did feel like we lost, I'd lost out to some degree, because when Justin and I had arguments, we had really good arguments, and we generally balanced each other out. We always found a way through. And it wasn't that I wanted to be MD. What I wanted to be was the partnership running the two of it. And it took me about, I don't know, 6 months to accept it. And, I'm not proud when I look back. I think I threw my toys out the pram a little bit. Probably could have done with somebody having a difficult conversation with me when I look back on that. So I think they're inevitable. I think that people feel like they lose out, but it's not inevitable that you lose everybody along the way. Or if you are, you're not having the conversations in an appropriate way, and you're not allowing for, it sounds a bit hippie to talk about a healing, but there has to be. And I hope that answers your question. Fiona, ask more if you want me to expand on that.
I'm sure she will. So another question here. It's from James McClave. These conversations seem really against my company culture. We've built the company on the culture, and we need to make a real shift. How do we deal with the bruising in the immediate aftermath?
Yeah, okay. There's a few different strategies, and I meant to say right at the start, Mark, that I am very happy to take emails off people who want to discuss specifics, as part of this. So I can only talk in general terms, but there are a number of things. Sometimes the smartest thing to do after one of those conversations is actually nothing. It's just to allow time to heal, because it's a bit like, I always say, it's a bit like if you've played your best friend at tennis or golf or something like that, and they've absolutely murdered you on the sports field. If they are all, and you're really upset about it, if they keep coming up to you and saying, "Are you all right? Are you fine? Are you okay?" Actually, it just makes you more annoyed. And sometimes giving people space to do it is a strategy in its own right, for a short period at least. I think sometimes it's a strategy to acknowledge that, actually we might have both said things out of turn, or we've been clumsy in this, but we're going down this route now. This is what we've decided. I appreciate how much effort you put into defending your position, but we have moved on. And what I would like to do is, in 3 or 4 days' time, I'd like to talk about not the decision, restore an equilibrium in the business, and the fact that you separate the way they're feeling from the actual decision can be really helpful. And in a lot of cases, by the time you come to that conversation, people go, "Oh, do you know what? It's fine. I'm okay." I think you go a step up the spectrum. I think there's nothing wrong with saying to somebody, describing what you see. "I can see how upset you are about this," or "I can see that you're really annoyed still about this," or "I can see you've not totally bought in to this new direction. I want us to have a conversation about that rather than anything else." Sometimes you can use distraction strategies, which is you look around for other things to get you both interested and engaged. Funnily enough, a client I've been working with recently, 2 people who were really struggling with their relationship. Actually, it took a fresh product launch to reinvigorate them. They needed a new field to play in, and so there's lots of answers to that question, and you'll probably have to fish around for different things. But the important word there is culture, and to be very cognizant of the culture, because in some businesses, particularly software businesses, people are quite gentle and quite sensitive and respectful of each other's position. And sometimes, it takes little more than just a slight hardening of your position to have that conversation. And in other organizations where conflict and strong opinions and all the rest of it are much more part of the way we do things, you might actually have to, bring an elephant gun to the party and have a real, toe to toe. And judging how hard to go with that is a tough thing. And
I think that's a great answer. I don't know if you're still there, but I think the other thing that's probably worth pointing out about culture.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think the other thing that's probably worth pointing out about culture is if your culture is such that difficult conversations are a problem, you need to kind of think about the culture that you are creating. There are a number of ways, I think, that you can create a culture where people can be more open and honest and upfront with each other, that don't necessarily mean that you're just smacking people. And I mean, I don't think, and difficult conversations aren't about having fights. They quite often become big barneys because they've been hidden away and not discussed until that point that there's a seismic shift and suddenly there's a great eruption of venom.
When I talk about this in seminars, old Victorian pressure cooker, and that's what it's like. This stuff builds and builds and builds, and so people say, look, I need to have a word with you, and then it goes from being quite quiet and quite respectful to a huge argument in no time at all. And that's always a sign.
That sounds
like people have
my wife, actually.
Yeah, always remember this session isn't therapy, Mark.
I pay more for my.
So it's a sign that we haven't addressed as a culture a culture, or we haven't created a culture of true openness. And there are some simple things you can do about that. You can, at the end of your sprints or at the end of each week or whatever, you can make sure that you properly review what's gone on as a team, for instance, so that people get, and a simple thing to do is one of those engineers' performance improvement grids. What would we do more of? What would we do less of? What would we start doing? What would we stop doing? And get people used to putting their feedback on the wall, which is sort of a third party, but encourage them to avoid words like communication, motivation, and strategy, which mean absolutely nothing in a real term. People often say we should communicate more, and you can't let them get away with that. So you stick that on the board, and then you say, who should have communicated more? What should they have communicated? What didn't they communicate? What would you have needed to know in order to be able to move your section of the sprint further, faster, etc.? And it's funny, once people used to doing that, and then they get into work next day and everything's fine and they can move on, they realize that the difficult conversation isn't as difficult as they imagined. It's always harder in your head than it is once you set out, particularly with practice. And so from a cultural point of view, I always try and encourage people to build something into their habitual practice that encourages people to get feedback, listen to feedback, and let's not forget that it's not always bad. It could equally be good stuff as well. But if they're used to that, then having those conversations becomes easier.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Fiona's come back. Thanks, Paul. On that, I kind of see conflict as a tough thing to deal with, but I know it's a necessary thing on occasion. Any tips for turning conflict into a creative process when feeling shitty?
Yeah, I think partly what I've just said about externalizing it, and I also try and look for the common ground first. So, if we have had a conflict, let's, for argument's sake, say over, one person wants to invest a couple of $1,000s in new tech, and somebody wants to invest it in I don't know, a training program for a new hire or something like that. And often these things come down to little things like that.
In both these situations, you've gone. I would say in both those situations, the appropriate thing to do is to invest in neither and invest in coming to Business Software USA.
Yes, of course, which is better than both altogether. But nice plug. If you carry on like that, you and I will be having a difficult conversation. So, as part to make it part of the creative process, often when I'm mediating in these situations, which I sometimes do, I'll say, well, what's the bigger problem here? You know, and actually, what you do is you try and say, well, it's not a question of whether we get some new tech or whether we send people on the training course. The bigger problem is that not making enough progress on. And then, you know, or we're behind on our schedule, or the product features aren't getting great feedback from the customers, or whatever it is. And then you say, okay, if that's the problem, let's look at 10 different ways that we might, you know, solve that problem. So it becomes more about the principle and less about the position that people hold. And if you constantly go for the principle, then it allows you to talk about it in a slightly more objective way. And that's certainly for things that are practical and external. If it's things that are more, you know, performance-led, and if there's two founders, one of the things that they should do is that they should monthly, whatever is appropriate, is they should kind of have an open conversation about how it's going, and they should say things like, you know, I really liked it when, and you do all of that, but actually, you really pissed me off when, and they get used to those conversations really early on, and make a game of it almost. And if they struggle saying it, and some people do, I get them to write it down and then kind of hand them over, you know, and then talk about it, so that the worst bit of telling is done, it's written down. And also sometimes, if you're very much an introvert, to clarify your thoughts internally before, you know, before sharing them. And so sometimes getting people to write them down as problems. So, you know, when this happens, I feel that I would like a situation, and then you explain what you would like the outcome to be. And sometimes, in extreme circumstances, I've got people to write it down and literally swap papers, and then the worst of it's over, and then they can have a conversation. But most of the time, you don't need that. You just need to have that, be prepared to have that conversation on little things, so that actually, if a big thing comes up, you're used to it, and we don't get this flare up that sometimes happens when somebody gives you a piece of feedback that you don't like. The initial reaction, somebody gives you a piece of feedback that you don't like, is that they're an idiot, you know, and that's a natural reaction. Everybody does it, and actually you've got to get beyond that, because it's their perception of something you did, and that's the language we want to get to. If that's not too long-winded, I hope.
No, that's great. And actually, there's another culture question here, which is not necessarily about difficult conversations, although it can be. How would you address a lad culture at work?
Right. Okay. Culture questions are huge topics, because what I understand to be a lad culture, you know, Herman might have a different view. So what I say is that culture is like attitude. You know, if somebody comes in the morning into the office and they're guide, and they've clearly been up all night, and they're on their third coffee of the day before they actually open their screen, and then they wander off and have a cigarette outside, and then they come back in and whatever, you would put all those behaviors together and you would say this person's got a lousy attitude. But attitude is a kind of aggregate of a bunch of behaviors. And culture is an aggregate of many more behaviors. And anyone who saw Alex Osterwalder's culture presentation last year, that's what he was talking about, is you have to boil it down to behaviors. And I totally agree with Alex on that. So you have to decide what behaviors make up the lad culture. And that might be swearing in the office. You know, I know some places where there's a lot of swearing and it doesn't matter, nobody cares, it's funny, and you know, and I know other places where people feel uncomfortable with it. Now, swearing is not right or wrong, it's only right or wrong in a specific situation. Likewise with the kind of gender shall we say, on in an office to a degree. In one place, it's context, it's funny and it's fine, and people go there. But change that context slightly, new member of staff or a merged team, and it becomes unacceptable. And so what you have to do is you have to almost put at the centre of a piece of paper lad culture, and then you have to write down the behaviours. And that might include, everybody in the pub at 5 o'clock. It might include swearing. It might include stuff that gets posted on message boards. It might, all of those sorts of things. And then you have to decide what's acceptable and what's not. And if somebody, for instance, thinks it's okay to rock up 10 minutes late to a meeting and, sit in the corner while they sip the coffee, and it's all a bit laddish, then if that's the wrong thing, if that's a behavior, those are a series of behaviors, and you have to address those behaviors. And that's what the difficult conversation is for. And you have to address them every time you see them in order to get somebody to change their behavior. They realize that they can't change their behavior. Did I cut out again? Did you get that?
I think we got that though. The other thing on culture that I really liked was the lightning talk last year from really lovely lady, Christine the architect. She was talking about culture, and her definition of culture was culture is the sum of behaviours that you accept and minus the sum of behaviours that you don't find acceptable. And I think that's quite a nice way of looking at it. I don't know if anyone's really kind of codified that in their own culture code. I mean, most culture codes seem to be around these are the things that we accept, and then there's some lip service to some of the stuff that they don't. But I mean, I think the things that are unacceptable can be as explicit as the things that you encourage.
So yeah, and to try and answer, I agree with that, and I think it's a great definition. To try and answer Herman's question a bit more succinctly, I would say that you've got two approaches. One is that you just decide as the leader what is appropriate or not behavior-wise in your department, and when it's not, you just start with a gentle conversation that says, I notice you did this, so let's say I'm using swearing, or a particular swear word, so just as an example, I noticed that you use the F-bomb, whatever, in the office. That makes some people feel uncomfortable, and I don't want an office where people feel uncomfortable for any reason. So please stop. And it can just be. It doesn't have to be a meeting. It doesn't have to be a formal process. It can be something you say over coffee. And then if that continues, and you say, look, I spoke to you once before, and you kind of raise the intensity just a little bit. And I've noticed you're still doing it, and I still see people rolling their eyes or looking a little uncomfortable, and it's not part of what we want in our office. So please stop. And you do that to a point where actually, 3, 4, 5 times, because it takes that many times to change someone's behavior. But then if they don't, then you have now got platform upon which you can actually take a more formal approach if you want to. So that's one approach. The second is that, you can try and map your culture as a team. It's a really interesting exercise to do. And you can either use something like Johnson & Scholes Cultural Web as a way of doing it, which I'll reference it later if you want. But I think the stuff that Alex Osterwalder is doing around culture is really interesting and simpler than that, and perhaps easier to use. I think it's potentially as good as the value proposition, the business model canvas to use, because what you want is a conversation about behaviors, what behavior is appropriate and what is not in the business. And if you get people to agree to it as a group, it's easier to enforce it. So, Herman, I hope that answers your question.
I think that's really interesting, and it's a great question. One of the other things I think about addressing a lad culture is that if you can decide the culture that you want and you can start to map your culture, you then have to think about how it's going to be different. And if I'm extrapolating here, but if you have a lad culture, you probably have a culture that involves a lot of men.
Yeah.
And it would be very easy to say, well, employ more women.
Yeah, I was avoiding that answer because it's too easy to say. Yeah, it's
Well,
right.
it's too easy to say, and it probably won't happen, because if you have the wrong kind of culture or that kind of culture, and you then have people coming into your organization, they're either not going to want to work with you, or you start to kind of have that toxic homogeneity of culture that means that unless you are coming in with 3/4 length trousers on a skateboard or whatever it is, you start to kind of shut yourself off to a bunch of other really useful, fantastic skill sets from other people. So you not only have to work out what you're doing, but then think about how you really address that. And if you want to employ people that are from different backgrounds to yourself, you have to think a lot about the kind of advertising you're running, the words that you use in your advertising, the words you're using to describe the company on the website, what you're doing. There's a whole ton of things that start to happen, I guess, off the back of that.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with that, and I think it's really important to, if it's unfortunate, but there are many more, say for instance, male pro.
Although interestingly, quite often,
but it's
universal, but
it's not universal, but it's one of those things. It's just easier for people to recruit that way, and that can be a problem. And one of the questions you have to ask is, well, actually, if we wanted to employ a more balanced workforce, what is it about our culture that would attract, and what is it about our culture that would repel? And that is a really powerful word, repel. But I've literally made people, make 2 lists, and because nobody wants to repel anybody from their business. But when you start to think about it, then you start to say, well, actually, there are things we do that would make us less attractive to a female candidate. And, those are important conversations. And the difficult conversation, again, going back to Helen's question, is you have to address it one person at a time, one behavior at a time, and be consistent with it. And it's sometimes easier to think about it in terms of, is that a behavior that would prevent us becoming the broadly based business that we want to become? So
cool. Well, here's another one. Tough one.
Yeah.
Hey, Paul, what's your experience with dealing with people with mental health difficulties, such as depression? How would you balance the need to discuss something such as productivity versus the empathetic case?
Yeah.
You said it was about tough conversations.
Yeah. No. My experience is actually, it was more my business partner's experience. I remember the first time it really hit it. I set up my first business. I was 26, and I had never met anybody with any kind of mental health issues. And we had a sales guy who we knew he'd had problems with schizophrenia when we took him on, but he was a friend of my business partner's, and we gave him a chance. And he had some real ups and downs. And through the process of getting to know that, it kind of opened my eyes. It was part of the growing up, if you like. And then over the years, there've been 1 or 2 other cases that have come to light. And I would say that often you're having a conversation about productivity is what will lead people, if you do it well, is what will lead people to open up about how they're feeling. Unfortunately, it'd be great, if everybody felt comfortable enough to say, hey, do you know what? I have been suffering from depression, or I'm, on medication for, and I wanted to do it, but they don't do it. It's often a little problem that starts that off. And I think that's why I always say start very gentle. but still have the conversation, still do it, and always base it on behavior. Mark, I notice you have been. I notice you were later into work than you normally are. I notice that you've been slower to do this, finish this job than you normally are. And I wanted you to know that I know, and I want to work out what's going on. It's not a bollocking. It's not disciplinary. It's addressing the behavior, and then from that, often those things come out. But what I have learned is that if somebody has a mental health issue like depression, then if you hire smart young people, it's gonna happen to you a few times in the growth of your let's say smart young people. If you hire smart people, it's gonna happen to you a few times, and what you have to do is you have to address that issue. You almost forget about the productivity in that case. You've got to make sure that you address that issue and you address it professionally, because actually the one thing I've learned is that I know nothing about it really that's useful, and in every case we've learned to the recommendation you can make is to help somebody find somebody to talk to, and over the years that's what we've done. In one serious case, we ended up having a conversation with our staff members' permission with their doctor about how we created the right, how we managed them in the workplace to aid their recovery. And in other cases, there are some great services that you can almost plug into usually through your health scheme or whatever, but there's some great services that you can plug into, because I think you as a founder, CEO, whatever, need some real guidance on how to deal with those issues. It won't happen very often, but it really touches you when it does. Sorry, Fiona, that's the best I can do on that one.
Okay, thank you. This I think is maybe a really nice one. I've finished. I'm getting a big echo.
Right. Okay.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Top 5 tips for difficult conversations.
Okay.
The buzz version, number 4, should make our jaws drop.
Right. Okay. Number 4 will make your jaws drop, and you won't believe what you'll find in number 5. Okay. Number 1 is act quickly. Let me see how many I've got. Okay, number 1 is act quickly. It never gets better; it only gets later. Number 2, start soft, but don't be afraid to build up. Number 3. Big differences in opinion about performance, etc., are often to do with different perceptions. And if you go back to my Luminous Spark presentation a couple of years ago at BoS, that's a good place to start with that. Number 4 is rehearse. It sounds strange, but you think you're going to be fine when you have that conversation, and because it's an emotional stretch for you, then you're out all wrong. And my advice has always to be, find somebody you trust, sit them down in front of you and say it to them and ask them how it feels. Number 5 is allow time for, it will get better if you address it, and allow time for the bruises to heal. People are tough. They get over stuff if they know where they stand. And the bonus one, number 6, is never think you're doing someone a favor by ignoring an unacceptable behavior. You're not. You're actually reinforcing that behavior if you ignore it. There you go. That's my best shot, shooting from the hip.
That's fantastic. We've even got a click to a link on the 6th page as well, so you served another ad on that one.
There you go. Yeah.
Fantastic. Paul, great to talk to you. Always is, and thank you so much for spending the time and answering those questions. You are Paul at oceanlearning.co.uk.
I am indeed, and I'm always happy to hear from people. Just find me a question. We talk about this stuff all the time with people, and particularly those of you in the startup. phase of the business. Even if you just want somebody to rehearse with, let me know. It's a Skype call away or a hangout away, so that's fine.
Yeah. No, and you've been, I know a vast number of people from Business to Software who've, and elsewhere actually, that have been in touch with you with various questions and found you to be fantastically helpful and open and generous with your time and your advice. So thank you. Now we're going to see you in September, aren't you? Hopefully I'll see you before.
Yeah, I'm going to come across to Business Software. I'm really looking forward to that. I sadly was booked out when you were in Ireland, and I really regret it after seeing all the feedback from it. So I will be in I'll be in Boston in September, and that's another good time to come and pat me on the shoulder and ask me questions.
Yeah, maybe we should get you to do a workshop or have a table or something to lunch to chat to people so they know where you are. And
very, very happy to do that. Yeah,
we could put up a big pink helium Paul Kenny balloon or something.
You could try.
Paul, great to talk to you. Thanks so much. We'll see you in Boston, 12th to the 14th of September. We'll put this hangout up on the Difficult Conversations talk page as well, so you can go back and reference it, and also have Paul's contact details so he can get all the spam instead of.
It's fine. I'm used to it.
Exactly. Great. All right. Thanks so much, Paul.
My pleasure.
See you soon. Take good care. And thanks very much, everybody, for bearing with us. Take care.
Bye. Bye-bye.